And that, class, is why the Galactic Council's Peace Accord of 2387 is considered the cornerstone of our modern interstellar society. Droned Professor Glibnor, his gelatinous form jiggling with what passed for excitement among the blob people of Glutinous Prime. A chorus of polite clicks, whistles, and electromagnetic pulses rippled through the lecture hall, the universal translator struggling to convey the sentiment of fascinated boredom expressed by the assorted alien students, all except one. In the back row, a solitary figure sat hunched over a data pad, furiously scribbling notes with what appeared to be was that a knife? The alien's eyes darted around the room, assessing exits, cataloging potential weapons, and if one looked closely enough, occasionally rolling in exasperation. Now then, Professor Glibnor burbled, oblivious to the predator in his midst. Who can tell me the 3 fundamental principles of the Peace Accord? A tentacle shot up near the front. Oh, I know this one, chirped Tentorix the Xeno squid. Non-aggression, cultural exchange, and, oh yeah, mandatory group hugs. The human in the back snorted so hard he nearly impaled himself on his pen. Professor Glibnor's gelatinous mass quivered with approval. Excellent, Zilnor, though the 3rd principle is actually mutual aid and support in times of crisis. Group hugs are more of an unofficial addendum. Now, can anyone give me an example of how these principles have been applied in real-world scenarios? Silence fell over the classroom. Even Urlax's eager tentacle drooped. Anyone? Professor Glibnor's voice took on a hint of desperation. Come now, surely someone can think of... Hoth, came a gravelly voice from the back. All eyes, stalks, and sensory appendages swiveled towards the human. Professor Glibnor's surprise was almost palpable. I beg your pardon? The human sighed, setting down his knife pen and leaning back in his chair. Hoth, Ice Planet, Wampa attack, Tauntaun disembowelment, rescue mission, mutual aid in a time of crisis. Blank stares met his explanation. It's from... you know what. Never mind. The human waved a hand dismissively. How about this instead? When the Jarnexul tried to consume Rigel 7, a last solar cycle, and the combined fleets of 6 different species drove them back. Professor Glibnor's entire body brightened. Ah, yes, excellent example. Jack, the human supplied. Ethan Drake. Yes, thank you, Jack. The Rigel 7-day incident is indeed a shining example of galactic cooperation, though I must say, your first example sounds rather violent. Jack grinned, a gesture that sent shivers through several of his classmates. Sometimes violence is the answer, Profa, especially when you're dealing with hungry ice monsters. A horrified gasp rippled through the room. Professor Glibnor's gelatinous form quivered with distress. Now, Mr. Cooper, we mustn't entertain such barbaric notions. Violence is never the answer in our enlightened society. Jack's eyebrow rose so high it threatened to achieve orbit. Really? Never? Absolutely never, Professor Glibnor affirmed, his body jiggling with conviction. The Peace Accord teaches us that all conflicts can be resolved through dialogue and understanding. Aha, Jack drawled, his voice dripping with sarcasm. And I suppose if a Krolivar death squad burst through that door right now, you'd invite them to sit down for a nice chat over tea and crumpets. Several students instinctively glanced at the door, as if expecting said death squad to materialize at any moment. Professor Glibnor, however, remained unperturbed. The Krolivar Imperium signed the Peace Accord along with everyone else, Mr. Cooper. They would never engage in such barbaric behavior. Jack's laugh was sharp enough to cut Dura steel. "Oh, you sweet summer child. You do realize they only signed that treaty because it was easier than conquering everyone outright, right? So, playing the long game, lulling you all into a false sense of security." Mr. Cooper." Professor Glibnor's gelatinous form rippled with indignation. "Such accusations are entirely unfounded and go against everything the Galactic Council stands for." "Yeah?" Jack stood up, his muscular frame towering over his alien classmates. "Well, maybe it's time for a little reality check. Computer," he barked, "initiate emergency scenario Alpha 3. The lights in the lecture hall suddenly dimmed, bathing the room in an ominous red glow. Alarms began to blare, and a robotic voice announced, "Warning, hostile forces detected. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Chaos erupted. Students scrambled in every direction, some diving under desks, others making a beeline for the exits. Floorbacks, the Xeno squid, somehow managed to tangle all 8 of his tentacles together and was now rolling helplessly across the floor. Professor Glibnor's gelatinous form quivered violently. What is the meaning of this?" he burbled in panic. Jack, meanwhile, had vaulted over 3 rows of desks and was now standing at the front of the classroom, a predatory grin in his face. "Welcome to Humanity 101, folks. Lesson 1, always be prepared." So with a flourish, he retrieved a compact, multifunctional defense tool designed for emergency situations. "Mr. Cooper," Professor Glibnor's voice had risen several octaves. This is highly irregular. I must insist that you cease this disruptive behavior at once." Jack ignored him, instead addressing the panicking students. "All right, listen up, you lot. This is now a crash course in basic survival. First things first, assess your surroundings. Identify potential weapons, escape routes, and defensible positions." A Vexillian with moth-like wings timidly raised a delicate appendage. Mr. Human, is this going to be on the exam?" Jack's grin widened. "Oh, it's going to be on the exam, all right. And trust me, you do not want to fail this test." As if on cue, the doors to the lecture hall burst open. In strode a group of menacing figures clad in midnight black armor, their faces obscured by helmets that looked like the stuff of nightmares. "Krolovar Death Squad, right on schedule," Jack muttered, raising his weapon. "All right, class, pop quiz. What's the first rule of combat?" Blank stares met his question. Even Zilnor, who had finally untangled himself, looked utterly lost. Jack sighed. "Don't get shot. The first rule is don't get shot. Now everybody find cover." The alien students scrambled to obey, diving behind overturned desks and cowering in corners. Professor Glibnor, in his panic, had somehow managed to ooze himself into a perfectly spherical shape and was now bouncing erratically around the room. "This is not how we handle conflict resolution," the professor wailed as he ricocheted off a wall. "We need to open a dialogue, establish common ground, perhaps engage in some trust-building exercise." Professor Glibnor's diplomatic overtures were cut short, as a stun pulse caused him to momentarily lose cohesion and slide down the wall. Jack, meanwhile, had taken up a position behind the lecturer's podium. "See that, class? That's why you don't monologue during a firefight. Now who wants to learn how to disarm an opponent?" A timid Arcturian raised a tentacle. Couldn't we just try talking to them? Maybe they just misunderstood." Jack's face, palm, echoed through the chaos of the lecture hall. "Kid, they're literally calling themselves a death squad. I don't think they're here to exchange friendship bracelets." as if to emphasize his point. One of the Krolivar invaders let out a bone-chilling roar and charged towards the podium, energy blade a-moaming ominously. Right then, Jack muttered, tossing aside his plasma rifle. "Looks like we're doing this the old-fashioned way. Pay attention, class. This is how you handle a close-quarters encounter with a hostile alien twice your size." What followed was a master class in hand-to-hand, or in this case, hand-to-claw combat that left the alien students alternately awestruck and horrified. Jack moved with a fluid grace that belied his muscular frame, ducking and weaving around the Krolivar's wild swings. "First," he called out, narrowly avoiding a swipe that would have taken his head clean off, "you want to assess your opponent's weak points. In the case of the Krolivar, that's the joints in their exoskeleton and the sensory nodes on their neck." The Krolivar let out another ear-splitting roar, clearly not appreciating being used as a live demonstration dummy. Jack continued his impromptu lecture, punctuating each point with a well-placed strike or dodge. "Next, you want to use their size and aggression against them. Let them wear themselves out while you conserve your energy." The alien students watched in fascination as Jack deftly maneuvered the raging Krolivar around the lecture hall, causing the invader to stumble over upturned chairs and slip on scattered data pads. And finally, Jack grunted, executing a move that looked like a cross between a judo throw and interpretive dance. "When the moment is right, you strike." With a series of moves too fast for most of the alien eyes to follow, Jack managed to flip the Krolivar onto its back, pin its arms, and somehow use its own energy blade to short out its armor's power supply. The lecture hall fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of the human and the faint sizzling sound coming from the incapacitated Krolivar. Jack stood up, brushing off his hands as casually as if he'd just finished a light workout rather than a life-or-death struggle. "And that, class, is your introductory lesson to Deathworlder combat. Any questions?" A forest of appendages shot up, accompanied by a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and panicked squeaks. "Yes, you there." Jack pointed to a trembling Andromedian whose crystalline structure was vibrating with excitement or with terror. It was hard to tell which. "What's your question?" "That was amazing," the Andromedian chimed. "Can you teach us how to do that?" Jack's grin was equal parts pride and mischief. "Well, that depends. How do you all feel about a little field trip to a Krolivar battle arena?" The horrified gasps that filled the room were quickly drowned out by the sound of Professor Glibnor, who had finally managed to reconstitute himself, fainting and splattering across the floor once again. "I'll take that as a maybe." Jack chuckled. "Now who wants to learn how to disarm a plasma grenade?" 3 standard galactic hours later, the lecture hall bore more resemblance to a war zone than an educational facility. Scorch marks adorned the walls, overturned desks formed makeshift barricades, and the acrid smell of ozone hung heavy in the air. In the center of it all stood Ethan Drake, looking for all the world like he'd just had the time of his life. His hair was singed, his clothes were torn, and there was a manic gleam in his eyes that would have sent most sensible beings running for the nearest escape pod. The alien students, on the other hand, were clustered around him with an air of awe and trepidation. Even Slorbo, who had spent most of the lesson tied in knots, sometimes literally, was gazing at the human with a mix of fear and admiration. "All right, class," Jack announced, clapping his hands together. "I think that about wraps up today's practical demonstration. Any final questions before we call it a day?" A tentative appendage rose near the back. It belonged to a Zorlak, a species known for their analytical minds and complete lack of a sense of humor. "Mr. Cooper, sir," the Zorlak began, its voice a monotone buzz. "I fail to see how this exercise aligns with the curriculum of Galactic Peace and Harmony 101. Could you please explain the educational value of teaching us 17 different ways to incapacitate a sentient being?" Jack's eyebrow shot up. "Only 17? Damn, I'm slipping. We'll have to do a refresher course next week." The Zorlak's compound eyes blinked in confusion. "I do not understand. Are you implying that there are more than 17 ways to—" "Oh, my sweet summer xenomorph," Jack chuckled, patting the Zorlak on what he hoped was its shoulder. "With some species, it was hard to tell. There are as many ways to incapacitate a sentient being as there are stars in the galaxy, but that's not the point." "It's not?" querused several bewildered students. "Nope," Jack said, popping the ouchie with relish. "The point, my dear alien comrades, is preparedness. Sure, the galaxy might seem all sunshine and rainbows now, what with your peace accords and mandatory group hugs. But trust me, there's always someone out there looking to upset the apple cart." He paused, noting the blank looks on most faces. "Right, most of you probably don't know what an apple is. Let's try this again. There's always someone out there looking to, I don't know, release a Slorblat into the communal nutrient vat." A collective shudder ran through the class. Everyone knew about Slorblats and their fondness for turning communal nutrient vats into improlysum. "The point is," Jack continued, warming to his theme, "the universe is a big, scary place, and while it's all well and good to hope for the best, you've got to be prepared for the worst. That's where we humans come in." He began pacing the room, stepping over debris and occasionally prodding a still-twitching Krolovar with his boot. "See, we come from a little planet called Earth. Well, we call it Earth. You lot probably know it as, oh, dear cosmic entity not. That place or the world that must not be named. Or my personal favorite, nope, 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 the planet." A nervous titter ran through the class. Even the Zorlak's antennae twitched in what might have been amusement. "Earth isn't what you'd call a friendly place," Jack continued. "We've got everything from microscopic parasites that can liquefy your brain to giant sea creatures that could swallow a small moon. And don't even get me started on the weather. You think a little plasma storm is bad? Try standing in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane sometime." He paused, a wistful look crossing his face. "Actually, that's not a bad idea for next week's lesson. I wonder if the simulator can recreate a good old-fashioned Earth thunderstorm." The alien students exchanged worried glances. They had a feeling their insurance premiums were about to skyrocket. "Anyway," Jack said, snapping back to the present, "the point is, we humans have had to adapt to survive in a world that's constantly trying to kill us, and in doing so, we've become pretty damn good at, well, not dying." He gestured to the carnage around them. This is just a Tuesday for us, but for you lot, it's a wake-up call. The galaxy isn't always going to be the nice, peaceful place your textbooks make it out to be. And when things go sideways, trust me, they will. You're going to want a human on your side." A timid voice piped up from the back. It was the Vexillion again, its delicate wings quivering with a mixture of fear and excitement. "But Mr. Cooper, if humans are so badass, terrifying, devastatingly handsome," Kajak supplied with a wink. The Vexillion's antenna flushed a deep purple. "I was going to say intense. If humans are so intense, why did you join the Galactic Peace Academy?" Surely a being of your abilities would be more at home in a military setting. Jack's expression softened just a fraction. Ah, now that's the million-credit question, isn't it? Why would a Deathworlder like me sign up for what essentially amounts to the galaxy's biggest kumbaya circle? He hopped up onto the lecturer's desk, which creaked ominously under his weight. Let me tell you a little story, kids. Back on Earth, we had this saying, si vis pacem, para bellum. It's from an old language called Latin, and it means, if you want peace, prepare for war. A collective gasp ran through the room. Even the unconscious form of Professor Glibnor seemed to quiver in disapproval. Now, don't get your tentacles in a twist, Jack said, holding up his hands. It doesn't mean we want war, far from it, but we recognize a fundamental truth that a lot of species out here seem to have forgotten. Peace isn't a natural state. It's something you have to work for, something you have to be willing to fight for. He gazed out at the sea of alien faces, his own expression uncharacteristically serious. That's why I'm here. Because sometimes keeping the peace means being ready for when someone tries to break it. Alien noise. And let's face it, you lot couldn't fight your way out of a wet paper bag. Slorbokes raised a tentacle. Excuse me, Mr. Cooper, but what's a paper bag? And why would it be wet? Jack pinched the bridge of his nose. It's a you-know-what. Not important. The point is, you're all woefully unprepared for the realities of the galaxy, and it's my job, no, my duty, to make sure you're ready for whatever the universe throws at you. He hopped down from the desk, narrowly avoiding stepping on a piece of what used to be a hollow projector. Because here's the thing, the peace accord, it's a nice idea, a beautiful dream, really. But dreams need defenders. They need people willing to stand on the wall and say, not on my watch. Jack's voice took on a passionate intensity that had even the most skeptical students leaning forward. That's what humans bring to the galactic community. We're not just muscle, not just walking weapons platforms. We're the guardians of your peace, the shield that lets you pursue your dreams of harmony without fear. And he picked up a piece of debris, the mangled remains of a desk leg, and twirled it in his hands like a baton. We've seen the darkness that lurks in the void between stars. We've stared into the abyss and told it to piss off, and now we're here to make sure the darkness never touches your worlds. The lecture hall was silent, every alien student hanging on Jack's words. Even the Zorlax seemed moved, its normally impassive compound eyes glistening with what might have been tears. So yeah, Jack continued, his voice softer now. I could be out there on the front lines punching void krakens or arm wrestling black holes or whatever it is you think we humans do for fun. But instead I'm here teaching you lot how to survive, because that's what really matters. He tossed the desk leg aside with a clatter. Peace isn't just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of justice, of understanding, of preparedness. And if I have to blow up a few lecture halls and traumatize a few professors to drill that lesson into your heads, well, he grinned, that familiar mischievous glint returning to his eyes. Let's just say I'm happy to make that sacrifice. Tentative applause began, starting with Nex Torbin and quickly spreading through the room. Soon the entire class was chittering, whistling, and flashing bioluminescent approval. Jack basked in the adulation for a moment before holding up his hands for silence. All right. Save the standing ovation for when we've actually saved the galaxy or something. Now, who wants to learn how to hotwire a starship using nothing but a drinking straw and sheer force of will? The enthusiastic response was cut short by a loud squelching sound. Professor Glibnor had finally regained consciousness, his gelatinous form slowly coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape. "Mr. Cooper," the professor burbled, his voice a mixture of resignation and barely contained panic. "While I appreciate your unique teaching methods, I feel compelled to point out that weaponizing office supplies and commandeering spacecraft are not, in fact, part of the approved curriculum." Jack's grin could have powered a small sun. "Maybe not, Prof, but admit it, this was way more fun than another lecture on the history of diplomatic handshakes, wasn't it?" Professor Glibnor's silence spoke volumes. Professor Glibnor speaks in foreign language. "That's what I thought," Jack chuckled. "Now, class, for your homework, I want you all to come up with at least 3 improvised weapons using only items found in your dormitory. Bonus points if it's something that can take down a Krontok battle mech. Class dismissed." As the alien students filed out, chattering excitedly about plasma lamps and the offensive capabilities of quantum algebra textbooks, Jack turned to the still-dazed Professor Glibnor. "So," he said, casually leaning against a half-melted desk, "same time next week?" Professor Glibnor's only response was a low, prolonged gurgle that might have been a scream of existential despair. Jack took it as a yes. Word of Ethan Drake's unorthodox teaching method spread through the Galactic Peace Academy like wildfire, or more accurately, like a particularly aggressive strain of self-replicating nanobots. By the end of the week, his class had tripled in size, with students from every corner of the galaxy clamoring for a chance to learn from the infamous human. The Academy's administration was less enthused. "Absolutely not," Chancellor Verinox bellowed, his crystalline form vibrating with indignation. "I will not have our hallowed halls turned into a battle royale training ground." Jack leaned back in his chair, feet propped up on the Chancellor's immaculate desk. "With all due respect, sir, and I mean that in the most Earth way possible, which is to say with very little respect at all, your hallowed halls were about as useful as a chocolate teapot when it came to real-world crisis management." Chancellor's crystals flushed a deep crimson. "Mr. Cooper, need I remind you that this is the Galactic Peace Academy? We do not condone violence in any form." "And how's that working out for you?" Jack countered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because last I checked, the Kirovar Imperium didn't get the memo about your non-violence policy when they crashed my lecture." Chancellor Verinox's color deepened to an alarming shade of maroon. That was clearly an isolated incident, a misunderstanding, nothing more." Jack snorted. "A misunderstanding. They called themselves a death squad. What part of that is ambiguous?" "Well," the Chancellor floundered, his crystalline structure tinkling with distress, "perhaps they meant it metaphorically. A death squad for negative thoughts and antisocial behaviors." The look Jack gave him could have curdled milk in a different solar system. "Right, and I suppose their energy blades were just really aggressive therapy tools." Chancellor Verinox deflated slightly, his crystals dimming. "Mr. Cooper, you must understand our position. The Academy has a reputation to uphold. We can't have students running around learning combat techniques and improvisational weaponry." "Why not?" Jack challenged, swinging his feet off the desk and leaning forward. "Chancellor, let me paint you a picture. Imagine, if you will, a galaxy where every sentient being, from the mightiest quantum leviathan to the tiniest microbial speck, had the knowledge and skills to defend themselves and others. A galaxy where peace isn't maintained through ignorance and false security, but through mutual respect and the understanding that actions have consequences. The Chancellor's crystals pulsed thoughtfully. That does sound rather appealing. But surely there must be a less violent way to achieve such a state. Jack's grin was positively predatory. Oh, there is. It's called being so terrifyingly competent that no one dares to mess with you. And that, my crystalline friend, is exactly what I'm teaching these kids. He stood up, pacing the office with the restless energy of a caged predator. Look, I get it. We've all been coasting on this whole peace and harmony shtick for so long that you've forgotten what it takes to maintain it. But out there, he gestured vaguely towards the window and the star-studded void beyond. There are forces that don't give two hoots about your peace accords and non-aggression pacts. Hadim. Chancellor Verinox's color had faded to a pale pink, a sign of deep contemplation among his species. You truly believe we are so vulnerable? Vulnerable? Jack laughed, but there was no humor in it. Chancellor, if it weren't for the human fleet patrolling your borders, half the systems in this quadrant would have been overrun by now. You're not just vulnerable, you're practically gift-wrapped for any species with more teeth than conscience. The Chancellor's crystals clinked together in what might have been a sigh. Perhaps you have a point, Mr. Cooper. But your methods are so unorthodox. Surely there must be a compromise. Jack's eyes lit up with an idea. Actually, I think I might have just the thing. How do you feel about extreme team-building exercises? And so, one standard galactic month later, the Galactic Peace Academy unveiled its newest course, Advanced Conflict Resolution and Planetary Defense Strategies, or as the students quickly dubbed it, Human Says What. The course description was a masterpiece of bureaucratic doublespeak, promising to equip students with the necessary skills to navigate high-stress interspecies encounters and foster a deeper understanding of diverse problem-solving methodologies across the galactic community. In reality, it was Ethan Drake's personal playground. The lecture hall had been renovated after the third plasma grenade incident into a state-of-the-art holographic training facility. One day it might simulate the crushing gravity of a neutron star, the next the caustic atmosphere of a volcanic moon. Through it all, Jack pushed his students to their limits and beyond. "All right, you lot," he called out, striding through the simulated war-torn landscape of a once peaceful agrarian world. "Pop quiz. You've got a horde of cybernetically enhanced Reikian berserkers bearing down on your position, a malfunctioning force field generator, and a rubber band. What do you do?" Next, Torben, who had surprisingly emerged as one of Jack's star pupils, waved a tentacle excitedly. Oh, I know this one. We use the rubber band to catapult ourselves to safety while simultaneously short-circuiting the berserker's neural implants with the electromagnetic pulse from the failing force field. Jack's grin was equal parts pride and manic glee. Not bad, calamari brain, but you forgot one crucial detail. What are you going to use as ammunition for your makeshift catapults? Sir. The class erupted into a frenzy of discussion, debating the relative merits of using local flora, fauna, or possibly each other's projectiles. From his observation booth, Chancellor Verinox watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. Well, I'm still not entirely sure this is what the founders had in mind when they established the academy, he murmured to his assistant. The assistant, a hyper-intelligent shade of blue, flickered thoughtfully. Perhaps not, sir, but you can't argue with the results. Applications are up 500%, and we've received commendations from 17 different planetary systems for our innovative approach. to peacekeeping. And down in the simulation, Jack was demonstrating the proper technique for neutralizing an unstable quantum device through strategic recalibration. The alien students watched in rapt attention, their appendages scribbling notes furiously. "I suppose you're right." Chancellor Verinox sighed, his crystals tinkling with reluctant acceptance, "though I do wish he'd stop referring to the end-of-term exams as trial by combat." The assistant's blue deepened to a shade of amusement. "Actually, sir, I believe the students have started calling it graduation impossible." As if on cue, an explosion rocked the simulation chamber. Through the smoke, they could see Jack grinning like a madman as he shouted, "Congratulations, class. You've just survived your first antimatter containment breach. Who wants to try for 2? The enthusiastic cheers that followed were enough to make even Chancellor Verinox's crystals vibrate with a hint of excitement. "Well," the Chancellor mused, "I suppose if you can't beat them, join them," his assistant supplied. Chancellor Verinox's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been a chuckle. "Cosmic entities help us all." Down in the chaos of the simulation, Ethan Drake caught the Chancellor's eye and threw him a salute. In that moment, surrounded by eager alien students learning the fine art of saving the galaxy through controlled chaos, the human felt truly at home. After all, someone had to teach these peaceful creatures how to raise a little hell in the name of harmony, and Ethan Drake, proud graduate of Earth's School of Hard Knocks, was just the Deathworlder for the job. Class dismissed, until next time when the real fun begins. Down in the chaos of the simulation, Ethan Drake caught the Chancellor's eye and threw him a salute. In that moment, surrounded by eager alien students learning the fine art of saving the galaxy through controlled chaos, the human felt truly at home. After all, someone had to teach these peaceful creatures how to raise a little hell in the name of harmony. And Ethan Drake, proud graduate of Earth's School of Hard Knocks, was just the Deathworlder for the job. 6 galactic standard months later, the Galactic Peace Academy was barely recognizable. Gone were the serene meditation gardens and the gentle hum of diplomatic discourse. In their place stood obstacle courses that would make a Kzinti warrior weep, and the air crackled with the sound of vigorous peace negotiations, which more often than not involved copious amounts of simulated explosions. Jack stood atop the newly constructed Tower of Triumph, formerly known as the Spire of Serenity, surveying his handiwork with the satisfaction of a mad scientist whose doomsday device had just come online. "Mr. Cooper," a voice called from below. It was Torvik's, all 8 tentacles waving in excitement. "We've just received word from the Galactic Council. They want to see our end-of-term demonstration." Jack's grin could have powered a small star system. "Well, well, well. Looks like the big wigs finally want to see what real peacekeeping looks like." "All right, Squidface, sound the alarm. It's time for Operation Peace through superior firepower." As Torvix scurried, or rather squelched, off to spread the word, Jack allowed himself a moment of reflection. It had been a wild ride transforming this bunch of pacifistic pansies into a force to be reckoned with. Though there had been tears, mostly from the gelatinous species who discovered they were in fact flammable. There had been tantrums. The great cafeteria uprising of last Tuesday was still fresh in everyone's minds, but by the cosmic entities there had been progress, and inaudible. The day of the demonstration arrived with all the subtlety of a supernova. The Galactic Council representatives, a collection of beings so diverse, they looked like the setup to a bad joke. So a Blorgchian, a quantum shade, and a sentient gas cloud walk into a bar, filed into the newly reinforced observation deck. Chancellor Very Knox, who had undergone his own transformation from disapproving administrator to enthusiastic enabler, greeted them with a crystalline twinkle that might have been anticipation or mild terror. It was hard to tell with crystalline life forms. "Esteemed members of the Council," he chimed, his voice resonating with forced calm, "we are honored by your presence. I assure you what you are about to witness is the cutting edge of peace-keeping methodology. A Vextari diplomat whose species communicated entirely through interpretive dance, performed a series of moves that roughly translated to, 'This had better be good, or we're cutting your funding faster than a Zorgak's blade through meth and butter.' Down in the simulation chamber, Jack stood before his assembled students. They were a motley crew, tentacled, winged, gelatinous, and everything in between, but there was a hardness in their eyes, or equivalent sensory organs, that hadn't been there 6 months ago. "All right, you lovable bunch of misfits," Jack announced, pacing back and forth like a general addressing his troops. "This is it, the big show. Everything we've worked for comes down to this moment. Are you ready to show these stuffy bureaucrats what real peacekeeping looks like?" The roar of approval that followed would have sent lesser beings running for the nearest escape pod. As it was, several of the more sensitive council members had to adjust their universal translators to avoid sensory overload. "Computer," Jack called out, a manic glint in his eye. "Initiate Scenario Omega, Galactic Armageddon Blowout Bonanza." The simulation chamber hummed to life, transforming into a nightmarish landscape of warring factions, exploding stars, and what appeared to be a horde of sentient black holes with a grudge against organic life. "Your mission," Jack shouted over the cacophony of simulated destruction, "is to establish peace, save at least 3 inhabited planets, and if possible, prevent the heat death of the universe. You have 30 minutes. Go." What followed was a display of problem-solving so creative, so utterly bonkers that it defied description in any known language. Torvix led a squad of gelatinous beings in an interpretive dance that somehow convinced 2 warring factions to join forces against the black hole horde. A trio of winged Vexexilians used their combined bioluminescence to Morse code a peace treaty in 15 dimensions simultaneously. And in the center of it all was Jack, cackling like a madman as he dual-wielded quantum defibrillators to jumpstart a dying star. Up in the observation deck, the council members watched in stunned silence. The Vextari diplomats' interpretive dance had devolved into what looked suspiciously like the galactic equivalent of a slack-jawed gape. As the simulation reached its crescendo, with stars realigning, civilizations joining hands or tentacles or pseudopods, and even the black holes grudgingly agreeing to a non-aggression pact, Jack turned to the observation deck and bellowed, "And that, ladies, gentlemen, and assorted non-binary entities, is how you keep the peace in style." The chamber fell silent as the simulation faded away. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly at first, but building to a thunderous climax, applause broke out among the council members. That even the sentient gas cloud was vibrating at a frequency that indicated extreme approval. Chancellor Very Knox's crystalline form was practically glowing with pride. "Well, Mr. Cooper," he chimed, Your unorthodox methods have won over even our harshest critics." Jack, still slightly singed from his close encounter with a simulated supernova, grinned up at the Chancellor. "What can I say? Humans have a knack for making the impossible look easy, and occasionally explode." As the council members filed out, chattering excitedly about implementing similar programs across the galaxy, Jack turned to his students. They stood tall, or as tall as their various physiologies allowed, pride radiating from every appendage. "Well, kids," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "you did it. You saved the galaxy." Admittedly, it was a simulated galaxy, but hey, baby steps, right? Sloorbacks, overcome with emotion, launched all 8 tentacles at Jack in what was either a hug or a very enthusiastic attempt at strangulation. "Thank you, Mr. Cooper. You've taught us so much." Jack, wheezing slightly under the cephalopod's embrace, managed to grin. "Don't thank me yet, calamari brain. This was just the warm-up. Next semester, we're taking this show on the road. How do you all feel about a little field trip to the Andromeda Galaxy?" The excited chatter that followed was music to Jack's ears, as he extricated himself from Klaxorbax's grasp and looked out over his students, this ragtag bunch of former pacifists turned galactic peacekeepers extraordinaire. He felt a swell of pride that threatened to rival the explosion of the simulated supernova. Sure, they weren't perfect. They still occasionally forgot which end of a plasma rifle to point at the bad guys. And there was that incident last week where they accidentally negotiated peace between 2 species that weren't actually at war. But by the cosmic entities they were trying, and in Jack's book, that counted for a lot. As the students filed out, already buzzing with excitement about their upcoming intergalactic adventure, Jack allowed himself a quiet moment of reflection. He thought about Earth, that crazy death world that had forged him and his kind into the resilient, adaptable, occasionally terrifying beings they were. He thought about the vast, mostly peaceful galaxy that had no idea what was about to hit it, and he smiled. 'Cause if there was one thing Ethan Drake knew, it was this. The galaxy might think it wanted peace, but what it really needed was a little bit of human chaos, and he was just the Deathworlder to deliver it, one explosion at a time. "Class dismissed," he muttered to himself, already planning the curriculum for Advanced X in autopalomacy, how to make friends and intimidate people. Until next time, when the real fun begins. And somewhere in the vast expanse of the cosmos, the universe shuddered in anticipation. Peace was about to get a whole lot more interesting.